Hello and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be showing one of the many nursery crafts that I ended up doing while I was nesting. I got this rocking chair slash bunny for our baby girl, and while she won't be able to use it for a while, I thought it would make a really cute nursery decor. So this is the way it looked when I bought it. It was $10 from the thrift store, and I had never done a project like this before, so I figured for $10, it was a good excuse to just give it a try and see if I could do it. The plan was I wanted to refashion it with some new fabric and also give it a less creepy face. And I also wanted to make it so that the ears that were hanging down weren't gonna cover the face. It came with the name Jillian on the side of the wood rocker, so I wanted to remove that and replace it with our girl's name. And I also wanted to remove the crown on the bunny because I thought that was kind of odd, and the feet cuffs. That just seemed unnecessary. So I bought the Sherpa fabric at Joann's, and I don't remember exactly how much it cost per yard, but I got 3 yards total. The first step was to disassemble the rocker and remove the bunny from its wood frame, so I just did that with a screwdriver. Then I went in with my seam ripper and I ripped everything apart. I worked in pieces, so I started with the feet and legs, and I then worked my way up and back. As I was disassembling it, I also was trying to label the pieces to keep track of what was what. So once I had a couple pieces that were fully ripped apart, I started tracing the outline of them on my new Sherpa fabric. I tried to allow slightly more space from the edge of the template piece to the edge of where I was cutting, so that way the seam allowance was going to be a little bit bigger, because on the original piece it was a very small seam allowance, and I knew that I needed a little bit more to make sure it wasn't going to come undone over time. I started with the easiest part, which was the circles for the bottom of the feet. Next, I started combining the leg with the foot cuff into one piece of fabric because I didn't want there to be that separation. I wanted it to just be solid Sherpa leg. One thing to note is that the legs were not perfect rectangles. They kind of curved on one end, and that was where they should have been attaching to the bunny, kind of like a shoulder piece. And that's really important for when laying out the pieces later on. I didn't want to go through the process of tracing and cutting out every single piece of fabric if I didn't know that this was going to be possible, so I tried to work in segments. The first time I sat down at the sewing machine to start sewing pieces together was when I was attaching the round circular bottom of the foot to the side leg piece. I've included a diagram here on the right of what pieces I'm sewing together in a clip because it can be a little hard to decipher just from watching the video. And then I'm also trying to include the fabric templates on the left-hand side, and I use 2 different colors, orange and purple, to indicate what is being joined together. So in this case, the orange is being sewn to the purple line. And then after doing that, I went ahead and sewed the leg closed, so it kind of created like a cylinder shape. For 90% of this project, I did all of the stitching from the inside of the fabric, and I just used a regular running stitch. Once one leg was done and I thought it looked good, I then continued to do the other 3 until I had all 4 done and ready. Once the legs were done, I was feeling a little bit more confident, so I was ready to move on to the body of the bunny. So I then went ahead and I traced and I cut the underbelly section. The first thing I did was sew this little triangular portion closed at the back of the fabric, and that just helps to create the curvature at the back of the bunny. Then I went one by one and I sewed each leg to the underbelly, making sure that the curved portion of the leg, the longer side, was facing the outside. So that wasn't going on the underside of the belly, that was going to be the shoulder that gets attached to the top half. Here is what it looks like with all 4 legs on. At this point, it's starting to look really cute. Since I'd never done a project like this before, at this point I decided I wanted to try it on the frame just to make sure it was all fitting before I continued, and luckily it did. So confidence was growing. I then went ahead and I removed all the stuffing from the frame and just tightened up all the loose screws on the wood because it was a little wobbly. Now it was time to work on the top half of the body. So I went ahead, used my seam ripper, and I ripped apart the back, the seat, the tail, and then I laid them out to recut them on the new Sherpa fabric. At this time, I was not planning on having a pink seat or any seat for that matter, so when I was cutting the back pieces, I included those semicircles to be Sherpa as well. When it came time to sew the tail, I kind of mimicked what was done with the old one. So I sewed a piece of cord around the edge to create a drawstring effect. So that way I could stuff the tail and then pull it tight and just have it be a lot easier to sew onto the back. Next was attaching the two back pieces together, and the images on the left show how I cut the fabric to include that portion of seat. So when it came time to sew, this was very simple. It was just a straight line all the way down the back to join the two pieces together. Once the back was together, I stuffed the tail, I pulled that little drawstring closed, and then this was one of the first times where I had to do some hand stitching because I couldn't figure out a really good way to do it with the sewing machine just based on the pieces and the shape of them. At this point, this is where things start to really come together. It was finally time where I could join the top and the bottom half of the body together. And we'll take a pause for kitten snuggles because this little lady needed her attention. Throughout the entire process, I knew that the biggest challenge was going to be finding a way to sew as much of it together on the machine while still being able to slip it over the wooden frame and stuff it, and then I would have to probably manually hand stitch a portion of it closed. Thankfully, my methodology kind of worked out. So here I attached the orange and purple segments together, and then by doing so, I had the entire body complete with just some openings at the front where the head would go, and then at the back where the legs attached to the butt. Now that the body was done, it was time to work on the head. So I removed the stuffing, and I seam ripped apart each piece and labeled them. In the process of taking apart the head, I discovered that they had these cushioned rings that were going on the side, and that was where the handlebar got inserted. I really didn't want to remake these. I thought the original ones would work fine, so these two little rings were reused. So I mentioned in the beginning of the video that I didn't like the crown that was on the top of the bunny, so I did not copy that pattern, but in the process then I had to rework some of the face pieces to kind of close up that space so there wasn't like a empty circle at the top. We have another interruption for biscuit making. Otter loved this fabric so much, I couldn't keep her off of it. At the end, I ended up taking all the remaining fabric and I finished the edges, turned it into a little blanket for her, which she loves.
Fabric, little missy.
For the ears, I used the same Sherpa fabric for the outside, and then for the inside, I used a pink cotton fabric, and that I just got at Michael's because at this point in time, Joann's was winding down pretty much to nothing. The ears were super easy to put together. I did inside face to inside face and sewed around 90% of the perimeter. I just left a small opening at the tops where the ear would attach to the head. So I used that gap to flip the ears right side out and did that for both sides. Finally, it was time to start putting the face together. So in the diagrams, I kind of show what order I attached what piece to what. I don't have a clip of me sewing these little triangular pieces together, but that was done to kind of create the curvature of the face. That was part of the original pattern. For the pieces that go on the side of the head where these cushion donut rings attach, I ended up doing those by hand also because I couldn't figure out a way to use the machine to sew these cushions to the side pieces. And in that process, I also tried to roll the edges of the Sherpa in a little bit, so that way where I had cut the hole wouldn't start fraying or shedding in the future. Once each of the sides had their cushions attached, I then attached them to the face. And then I sewed the top pieces to the top of the face to close up the top of the head. At this point, I realized that I had forgotten to add the ears, so I kind of approximated where I thought they should go so that way they wouldn't hang down in front of the eyes. And then I used my seam ripper to open up the seams and then stitch the ears into place. This fabric was very, very difficult to seam rip, so I'm very happy that I only had to do this one time, because if I had made multiple mistakes and had to go through and open up a lot of pieces, it would have been a nightmare. So this is how the head looks with the ears attached and a majority of it stitched up. The last thing I did on the head was some partial sewing to close up the back of the head. I did a segment at the top followed by a segment at the bottom, but I specifically left a gap. That way I could get a screwdriver in there, because the handlebar that goes through the side of the head, it gets screwed to the wood rocking horse frame. So I needed an opening to be able to get that screwdriver through. My plan was that once the head was on the frame, I would then put the handlebar through the holes, screw it to the frame, and then I would just hand stitch this small opening closed. Now it was time to attach the head to the body, so I turned both pieces inside out and I sewed all the way around the neck to attach the two pieces together. So at this point, that meant that the only openings left in my bunny was the small one at the back of the head and then the back half of the bunny where the legs met the butt, and that was where I was hoping I could fit this entire fabric piece over the wood frame.
It's so cute.
This is how it looked at this stage, and then I went and tested it out by putting it over the wood frame, and luckily it fit, so that was a really huge relief. In the process of testing it, I thought it did look a little odd without the seat, and I was thinking over time, if our daughter actually uses the rocker, the seat fabric is going to get really messed up, so I then decided at this point I wanted to add a seat. So I traced the original seat size, and I used the pink cotton fabric that was used for the ears to be the top, and I also put a piece of stabilizer fabric that I owned underneath, just to give it like a little bit of thickness and durability. When it was time to sew the seat onto the back, I tried my best to tuck the edges under and just stitch top down to attach them. It didn't turn out 100% perfect. There are some small areas with bunched up fabric, but given the circumstances and not really knowing how else to do this, I'm pretty happy with the end result. At this point, I moved on to the easiest part of the project, which was the wood frame. First, I disassembled all the pieces, and then I ended up using an X-Acto knife to scrape off the name Jillian that was on there. To me, the lettering appears like it might have been cut from something like a Cricut machine and then adhered to the wood, because it was just coming off as I was scratching it. I didn't film the sanding process, but after the name was removed, I took the two side rails and I did some heavy sanding on the sides and the top of them. So this is how they looked after sanding, and you can still kind of see the name Jillian, but I just think that's due to the wood changing color over time. Plus, I don't think it will be that noticeable when I end up 3D printing our daughter's name and just placing it over that. So after sanding and wiping it clean, I did a very light polyurethane coat on the side rails, and I did that just to the tops and the sides. I didn't do any sanding or poly to the bottom of the rails because it doesn't really matter how those faces look, since they're just going to be on the ground and getting scuffed over time. Returning back to the bunny, as a crafter, my heart is very broken that Joann Fabrics is no more. So previously I probably could have bought like a pair or two of eyes and then the correct size nose for what I needed, but because they're going out of business, I had to buy everything in bulk through Amazon, which is super annoying. So now I have a ton of eyes and noses that I will probably never use at all, just because I needed a specific size that they didn't sell separately.
Bram. Just gone, Bram. Bram.
What happened?
She's attacking the rabbits in the window.
Hanging?
Yeah. That was so cute.
I used my seam ripper on the bunny's face to make the openings for where the eyes and the nose should go, and this is how that looked once it was done. Now it was time to put the bunny on the frame and stuff it. I started with stuffing the front legs, followed by the chest and the head. Once I felt like the face of the bunny was sufficiently stuffed, I inserted the handlebar and screwed it to the wood frame. Then I just continued stuffing the remainder of the body and the back legs. I did some hand sewing to close up the hole that was at the back of the head. Then I went in and did hand sewing to the back of the bunny to close it around the butt and back two legs. Once the bunny was stuffed and sewn up, I reattached it to the wood frame, and then I reinstalled the side rails. And voila, here's the finished product. She's definitely bulky. I might have overstuffed the legs a little bit, but I was thinking over time the stuffing might compress more, so hopefully it'll be okay. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I think that the face is super cute, the ears hang perfectly, the fabric is so plush and soft, and I kind of feel like I tackled a brand new type of craft in the process. The only mistake that I did not catch until the very end was that somehow I attached the right back leg in the wrong direction. So there is this little weird recess that shouldn't have been there, but it is what it is. I am still pregnant at the time of recording this, so I have a few more crafts that I might share before the baby comes, but I think after that I'm going to be out of commission for a while, so we shall see. It's all up in the air. Thank you so much to anyone who decided to watch this video. Maybe it was informative, maybe it gives you inspiration for a craft that you'd like to try to tackle, or maybe you're just checking in to see what I'm doing. Either way, I appreciate the time, and yeah, that's all. Thanks.